All right, welcome to another episode of Cosmic Disclosure. I'm your host, David Wilcock. We're here with Corey Goode, and we are taking your questions to bring this into a more interactive style of doing the show. So, as I've said before, we are reading the comments that you leave in the comment section, and we are starting to find things that people are asking that are worthy of inclusion, and hopefully you're going to like these episodes. It's a little bit different. Instead of focusing just on one topic, we're going to kind of cover a grab bag of what you are asking us, and that in turn gets fed to Corey for those people who are lucky enough to have their questions selected. And so in this episode, we're going to go through more of that very interesting stuff. So Corey, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
All right. Whew. Obviously, you're a controversial figure. This was a question, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, from Albacore. You got brought into this at a young age. And so first of all, let's just set the stage. You mentioned briefly before that you were in something in school called the Explorer program. So could you describe what that was exactly?
Back in the 70s and 80s, they would create programs for children that were gifted. They had programs for children that were special needs. They had all these different types of programs that were not the mainstream classes for children. And if you popped up in testing as being a child that would fit or be benefited in one of these programs, they would further test you, get permission from your parents, and then put you in one of these different programs.
So was there a component to the Explorer program that took place in school? Were you brought into special classrooms and given?
Yes.
Okay.
I was at school most of the time. It wasn't every day that I was leaving school. It would come in waves to where it would be 2 or 3 days a week, and then I would be in school.
Okay. Did the Explorer program involve you going to different classes than the other kids?
I was in completely different classes.
All day long?
Yes. That was once I reached after elementary school.
Okay.
During elementary school, I was in the same classes.
Okay.
But I was being brought out. I was in mostly the same classes. I would be brought out for certain different classes, and then sometimes during the whole day, me and other kids were taken out on field trips.
What were the things that happened in some of these classes that would have made them different from what other kids were doing? Like the stuff where you're actually in school.
Well, some of them would focus on, like if it's for gifted kids, it would focus on a curriculum that was either a grade ahead of what they would be doing. It just depended on which program you were in. I ended up getting bounced around later on into different programs. At one point, they even had me, and my friend John was like, "What is going on?" For one semester, they had me in a class with kids that were still like wearing diapers and all. It was
Developmentally disabled?
Right. And
Wow.
I was sitting there, and they were giving me basically no work to do. And it was very bizarre.
What could have possibly caused that to happen?
I got moved into that class.
Were you having post-traumatic stress from these things you were going through when you were taken away from school?
No, I was testing reading comprehension. I was like 4 grades ahead. I mean, I was testing ahead. I had some behavioral problems, but I was getting in fights and that kind of stuff. But
well, you said your nickname was Kickin' Ass Corey. Right?
Yeah, that was my nickname. But there was no rhyme or reason for that semester of why I was in that class.
Weird.
And during that semester, I was brought off campus quite a bit. But I had a friend, John. We were in all the same, most of the same classes the year before, and he was like, "What are you doing in that class? I never see you." So it was bizarre.
Did your parents know that you were being taken off campus?
If they did know something was going on, I think that I don't think they could admit it to themselves. I've asked some probing test questions. I really don't think they knew the full scope of what was going on.
Well, okay, but let's dig in a little deeper to this. Are you given this, do they have like a film that they play for your screen memory? If you're being brought out of school that much and they got to keep putting screen memories in your mind, can they like use the same tape? Or are they having to, is there like a lot of work that they have to do to actually generate screen memories for you? Do they show you movies? Do they just narrate something into your ear?
Well,
Here's what you did in school today. This is what you're going to remember now. How does that work?
they're like if you were supposedly going to the Museum of Natural History for the day, you would have a screen memory of going to the Museum of Natural History that day implanted. And for most of the kids, the memory would stay intact. The kids that were brought in that were more of the intuitive empath sliding scale were a little bit harder to do screen memories and blank slating of memories on, and they had to be managed closer. And they also had people, there would be kids that didn't make it throughout the whole program that would wash out, that couldn't cut it in the program, so to speak, and they would be blank slated and not picked up for the program anymore. A lot of them had a lot of abandonment issues that they didn't understand. They felt rejected, but in conscious life, but didn't have a reason for it. And the groups kept an eye on them to make sure that they didn't have memories coming back.
How do they actually put these screen memories in your mind? Are you shown a movie? Does somebody talk in your ear while you're under drug influence, or what is it?
Well, different ways. First of all, they would give you a shot of synthetic scopolamine.
Really?
Yeah, and mixed with other designer drugs. And they had the situations to where they would have a person sit there and hypnotically talk to you with their voice in a certain way. And
After you've been injected?
After you've been injected. And then they would debrief you at the same time that they were doing the blank slating and the screen memory. Then
What does that mean? What is the debrief?
Basically what you did that day. There would be a debriefing where they would take notes or videotape it. And
Discussing what you actually did that day,
right,
where you would share with them
what you did
your
in
training, your experiences
right,
in the training.
Right. And then they would go through the process of telling you, you will forget this, you will forget that, and they would put in trigger words or keywords that would lock or unlock the information. And then they would move on to the process to where they had different ways of doing it, to where they could show you like a film, a video with headphones on. They had a kind of shades that they could show you that had images on them. And at some of the times when kids were younger, they would read a book to them about, to try to give them a dream scenario, read a book to them while showing them silent images on video. There were a whole lot of different ways of doing this.
Well, now I'm going to...
And there was also the virtual reality component that they would use of once they had people in altered states, giving them a virtual reality type of overlay memory.
Did they ever show you movies where, like, the movie would have the data for your screen memory for that day in it?
Yes.
Would they make films for that purpose?
Yes.
Did the drugs that they gave you somehow psychedelically enhance the movie as if it was real and not just a movie?
Yes. Yeah, there's a very interesting documentary out that some guys did about scopolamine. I think they call it the devil's flower or something like that. I encourage people to take a look at that documentary. It's in its raw form, people lose control of their free will and will do whatever they're told.
Isn't it true that you can blow it in somebody's face?
I believe so, but usually
Yeah.
they give it to them in drinks or something.
Right.
And they become completely open to hypnotic suggestion.
Yeah,
And
I've seen the documentary. There's like a woman who says, I'll let him come into my house and I'll give him all my furniture
Right.
and all my belongings happily,
Right.
and smile as they're taking it away.
And
you
help
don't
them
even-
carry it out.
Right.
So, and they had already had other synthetic drugs that they used that did similar things, and they created a synthetic scopolamine and made a cocktail. But a synthetic scopolamine was one of the things that was in it. But they found that it was causing, heavy use of it was causing psychotic breaks in some people. The chemical way of doing it was not very good for people. So they discovered a technological way of affecting people's chemical and magnetic memories in their brain without being chemically invasive.
Next question comes from Noah Ward. And the question is, do we have a timeline for the data dumps?
I'm told that the data dumps are going to occur after a catalyzing event that's going to occur down here on the surface. This doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be this, but an example was given to me of something like a global economic meltdown to where it became obvious to everybody on the surface, all of the sleeping masses, that it's been a giant Ponzi scheme. Everybody that they voted for and supported were criminals in these people's pockets. And the masses of people that were normally asleep and wouldn't listen to things that people consider conspiracy theory will now be open to the information. After that point, the information will be dumped on the population through many different media sources, including the internet.
One of the things I covered about the alliance, the terrestrial Earth-based alliance, was, of course, we had the Oklahoma City bombing, very strange event. How did this one little van have enough explosive power to take off the whole front of the building? Doesn't make any sense. It seems like it was a trial run for 9/11. What a lot of people don't realize is, and you can go back and find articles on this, 2 days before Oklahoma City bombing, a whole airliner filled with flag officers, high-level military officials crashed, and they all died.
I remember that.
And Sherman Skolnick had data saying that those people were ready to go to Washington with absolute evidence that POWs who were known to still be alive and still be tortured in Vietnam, that had all been covered up because they had compromising information about the government, and that they had with them a guy who was supposed to be dead, who'd been written off as dead, who'd been a POW this whole time, and had this information that they were going to formally present charges of treason to the president at the time was William Jefferson Clinton, and of course they got aced. So I think, have you heard of that event on your own?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Okay, so do you have anything more to it than what I just said?
No, but that's one that's known. There have been several attempts to thwart the powers that be, and somehow something like that always happens, some sort of a freak plane crash, heart attack, illness. They always seem to be one step ahead and know that it's coming.
If you had the answer to the timeline question for the data dumps, doesn't that in and of itself compromise operational security? If we knew how it was going to happen, if we knew when it was going to happen, and if you actually had that information, you couldn't say it because then the cabal is going to make a defensive move against it somehow.
Right, and I doubt very seriously they would give it to me.
You said that you found out from Gonzales that they are withholding a great deal from you about the moves of the alliance and the plans of the alliance because you're now out here in the public sharing what's going on.
Right.
So it's possible that there could be a plan that is far more specific and detailed that you and I just have no access to. and that maybe the things that we are told might even be deliberate diversions so that the cabal will not anticipate how this is actually going to go down.
Right. And the cabal has been using this advanced artificial intelligence technology that gives them probable future scenarios that has helped them stay one step ahead this whole time. They've found a way around this, and they're pretty confident that they'll be able to do the data dumps if the alliance on the ground cooperates.
Well, I'd also just point out as one other thing for this question, go and watch my Wisdom Teachings episode where I'm talking about openly announced in Pravda, the Russian media, that Putin has got video footage, audio footage, solid evidence of the Bush administration being behind 9/11, using mini nukes. They've tracked the nukes, and that they're going to drop that data at the right time. And that was openly announced by the Russian media. So that could be another example. Some kind of big thing about 9/11 could kick it over the edge. There's lots of things that could kick it over the edge potentially.
Right. But if the data dumps happen too soon, the cabal will be able to mitigate it, call it conspiracy theory, tear it apart, and take it down.
And you said that some of the people in the Earth-based alliance have now treasonously told the cabal what's in the data dump.
Shown them.
Which gives them the opportunity to prepare alibis and counter-arguments for it.
Right. And it's also made them want to create a World War III scenario and that kind of stuff.
I don't really know how much you can do with this one, but let's give it a shot. It's from KD, and it's a very short, simple question. How many parallel worlds are there?
I know of only one that I read about, but it would stand to reason that there are an infinite number.
Okay.
I seem to remember that there was something about them going in, like there's a parallel reality and then another parallel reality this way, and they kind of go in a not in a circle or in a certain way, that there are many, but just traveling between we're just traveling between this one that I've discussed, where they use the Xerox room that sends people through this unpleasant type of portal.
Okay, so let's go back to what you know personally about this. A parallel world could be something that happens in the guise of time travel. So let's say you go back to the Earth, you reverse back in time, but you're here on the Earth. Are there two copies of you now that exist? Have you cloned yourself? How does that work?
Well, being that time is basically an illusion, and time is all happening at the same time, it's not, it only appears to be linear to us with our consciousness. Consciousness, to answer your question, when you travel in time, you're creating a new timeline, but you're also this timeline that you're on is something that you're creating with your consciousness. And if you do something to affect that timeline and then travel to the future, your consciousness is going to affect, let's say, if you kill your great-grandfather and you travel back to the future and expect to have your whole family lineage dead, it may not necessarily be so. That may have occurred on a different parallel timeline.
Okay.
And for a massive change to happen, a whole lot of people have to have a mass consciousness shift and perception of the change of time.
Could you go and see yourself? Could you go and find Corey as a 10-year-old boy and then be standing there and look in your own eyes? Is that theoretically possible?
Theoretically, speculatively, yes. It's possible.
would that somehow create a time paradox where if you've seen yourself, then you know that you exist in the future and that alters your future somehow?
Maybe on one timeline or parallel reality, but not necessarily on the timeline. Not necessarily when you go back, it's not necessarily going to affect your native timeline.
Right. So I think the key would be that we're so badly wanting to have one thread of time, one linear narrative that stays consistent, so that if you change the past, that everything changes. But it's really just like the timeline exists where you were here and you go forward, but then this one also exists where you go backward, and now you're layering another one on top, and now the two are sandwiched.
Right.
So what would happen if you tried to do this too much? If people were time traveling back, wouldn't it cause a lot of big problems? You mentioned that there were buffers on the spaceships that you guys had to prevent this time travel. Why were they so concerned about time travel?
Yeah, on temporal technology like temporal drives and that kind of thing. They didn't want people accidentally popping into different timelines and that kind of thing, or purposely.
What are the problems that it causes if they do that?
I mean, you can use your imagination. If one of the newer craft popped into an older timeline and stayed there, that craft could alter that parallel timeline's outcome of, and by giving them a new technology that's far ahead of what they would have had. But I was also told that timelines, people were going back trying to correct timelines by going back before they screwed up, perceived that they screwed up a timeline, and they were going back and back and back trying to fix timelines, and we were finally told by another race that to stop screwing around with it, that time is more elastic than we realized, and that things snap back and go the way that they're supposed to according to the co-creative mass consciousness of the root timeline that you're from. And there is a component that I've been briefed on a little bit that does go on with a time travel component that is not really supposed to be talked about, that is going on with a certain group. I guess you wouldn't really call them time lords, kind of a thing, but there is a group that does skip around in time and keeps an eye on other groups that have temporal technology.
Interesting. So we have one from Chukos or Kukos, C-U-K-O-S, and it is, how did the Voyager space probe cross the edge of the heliosphere if there is a barrier?
There was not a barrier up during the time that it crossed.
Right. When did the barrier form and what caused that to happen? Just to review, even though we've mentioned it before.
Right. That occurred, I believe, in December of this past year.
2014.
2014. And it was more than likely scheduled to happen anyway, but it occurred right after the Cabal groups had fired an energy weapon at one of the spheres that was in far Earth orbit. It lit up the sphere with an Aikido principle, redirected their energy back at them and destroyed the base. And things seemed to escalate very quickly after that happened.
Sure. Is there a protocol of meditation that people could follow that would help them contact extraterrestrials?
Anyone can reach out with their mind. There are any number of ways to meditate, like we've talked before, even daydreaming, prayer, meditation, all the different types of meditation themselves are getting your mind into that state. And when you broadcast your consciousness out, anyone can do it, but should you be doing it is the question that they should be asking. There are a lot of different beings that are sitting there waiting for people to reach out with their minds, to make contact with them. And most of them are deceptive. They have the ability to make you feel totally blissed out, make you feel love, make you feel love and light. They can manipulate your body to feel all kinds of things, and they can download all kinds of complicated, interesting information that is not necessarily accurate.
Well, Jacob, the other space program insider, told me that there was a particular extraterrestrial group from Alpha Centauri that they were calling the Centaurians, and that some kind of treaty had taken place where these Centaurians, who look essentially like people from Spain but albino, and they're very ripped, with kind of light-colored hair and very pale skin, were being allowed to start to mingle into our society. But he told me that if a Centaurian knew that you recognized that they were an extraterrestrial, that it was very dangerous, because they could then track you telepathically, and that could end up being very bad for you.
All these groups can track you telepathically. That's a lot of these people that are taking these little courses online and saying, I'm a remote viewer now, and try to remote view different bases and areas. They have people that are remote influencers that have technology enhancing them, working as groups that protect those places, and they can track you right back to your home, right back to your bed, and they can they can cause a lot of problems for you.
Are there cabal honey traps online where they try to find people who are starting to wake up and lure them into something?
Yes.
How does that work?
Some of the places where you go to take personality tests, they trick you into taking tests that will tell more about yourself. Some of these dating sites kind of things that ask a whole lot of questions about you, they're all profiling you. Even some of these sites where you're doing study on your heritage information, there's a lot of these.
Or the alleged IQ test.
Yeah, and the IQ, all these types of tests. There are a whole lot of different little honeypot traps that they have to, and then of course they look for people's internet traffic.
Will they be trolling forums like Above Top Secret and UFO, that kind of stuff, looking for people there?
Well, absolutely, and we'll talk at some point in length about how when I was working, I helped set up a data center with virtualized computers set up all over the world, where people would sit at desks with 6 monitors and pretend to be up to like a dozen different people going into forums and different sites, arguing with themselves with IP addresses from different parts of the world, stirring up problems, finding people that were putting out information they didn't like and attacking them and discrediting them and that kind of thing.
Let's end this on a positive note. Do you believe that we have a higher self?
Yes.
What about contacting the higher self? What would be an appropriate way to start seeking spiritual information?
First, you got to turn inward. Start looking inward. You start working higher and higher up with, when you start meditating more, looking inward more at the bad things about yourself, you start trying to not only forgive yourself for those things and change them, forgive others. There's energy that's released, and you begin to expand, and you begin to work higher and higher and higher up the higher self until self falls out of the equation and you just reach higher. And that's how you eventually, I believe, reach back to what people call source.
Very cool. Well, that's all the time we have for this episode. So we'll see you in future episodes of Cosmic Disclosure. I'm your host, David Wilcock, and I thank you for watching.